Well, howdy, folks. I'm Hank Sheffer. And once again, we're here on Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains with Larry Hedrick, our local historian, lecturer, and author, not to mention a major contributor and producer for Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains. But that really isn't enough to cover what Larry's all about, simply because he's been here since the 50s. That's 1950s. That means that he has been in and around these old mountains for nearly 70 years. That also means that he's known many of the principal old-timers of this era and gained firsthand knowledge of what they knew about the area. It was a time before the mountain was closed to any and all mineral claims that existed. That meant back then that you could go up there and beat and bang on rocks, and you could put in claims, and you could go for the gold, as they say. And yes, Larry has gained extensive factual information about Jacob Waltz over the years as well. One in particular of those old-timers was Tom Collenborn. He'd probably shoot me if he heard me say that, I guess. He was an avid collector, photographer, historian, and truly an amazing horseman. He and Larry became hard, fast friends and rode together throughout these mountains for many years, and they rode all over the mountains. It amazes me every day when I talk to Larry about where things are in the mountains. He says, "Oh, that's right over there. Oh, that's right over there." Well, yeah, right over there is a long way away if you're walking, let me tell you. Over those many years, the two men decided that the area really needed a museum. There was actually a really interesting part of that story when the two men decided to start the museum, because Tom kept talking about it and talking about it. Remember that? He kept saying, well, we ought to start one. We ought to start one. Well, Larry got fed up with that, and he finally said, okay, well, let's do it. And that's how it all got started. Well, moving along from that, let me tell you this. One of the questions that has come up to me over the years, over and over and over, was Jacob Waltz actually a real person? There's lots of irrefutable proof that he existed, but nobody ever talks about what the proof is. So what do we actually know about old Jake?
Well, Jacob Waltz truly is a mystery of the Superstition Mountains. About 20 years ago, a book came out that was supposed to be the gospel about Jacob Waltz and the Lost Dutchman legend. However, it turned out that a lot of the information, which was no fault of the author, was wrong. Some of it was even falsified, and that was so devastating that the book was stopped, and in fact, the family bought up several copies of it to keep it off the market. But as a direct result, two German gentlemen who both lived in Germany at the time, one of them lives in America now, who are genealogists. Their father was a genealogist, and they had worked with him years before they were working with themselves. And they knew exactly how the German record keeping was, which is somewhat difficult for us to understand. But they decided they were going to find this guy. And they done an amazing job, and they'd put a lot of research into it. And in 1905, they sent an unsolicited manuscript to the museum. And then one of them, Mr. Opal and his wife, came to the museum and visited with us. So using this document, which is several pages long and just absolutely full of footnotes, is what we're talking about. According to his baptismal records, he was born on November 2nd, 1810. And for whatever reason, his father gave him 250 gulden. I guess that's the same as a guilder that are used interchangeably, because he wanted to go to America. And he went up to a town. They were living in a town on a farm, which was a sizable farm in Vohenloh, Germany. And this is over near the Bavarian border in the Kingdom of Württemberg. And he went to a town named Heilbronn, which is about 15 miles away. And he bought a shotgun. He bought 55 pounds of foodstuff, a fur cap, a money belt, because these were coins that these 250 coins, it wasn't paper money. And then he had a special box made that was about 4 foot long and a foot square, and a carrying strap for it. And he charged all of it to his dad, and and took off for America. But he did not go to the normal places that people leave Germany to leave the country. He left at Le Havre, France, which was 500 miles away, and really went out of his way to go there. And the ship that he was on was the Villa de Lion, and he arrived in New York in 1839. Now, his dad died in 1943, and 1843, and of course the estate went through what we would call a probate, and in those documents it showed that Jacob Waltz at that time in 1843 was living in New Orleans. And it also showed all the receipts for all these things that had been charged that his dad paid for him. It had the name of the person that sold the shotgun, the person that built the box, and all this kind of stuff. And he was given the 250 gulden, which, by the way, I've tried many times to find out what a gulden is worth today, and I couldn't do it. But I did find a place where it said 100 gulden was worth about $6,000 today. So when that guy got off the boat with all the things he charged and the 250 gulden he had in his money belt, minus his passage, and he was worth about $20,000 in 1839, which was a lot of money. And all these records were held against his share of the estate. So from there on, he was educated at the University of Heilbronn down near Stuttgart. And a lot of people have said that he had an education in geology. Well, I done some research on the University of Heilbronn. It was formulated in 1819. Jacob was only about 9 years old at that time, so he would have been in that university around the late 1820s or early 1830s. And it was an agricultural school, but it offered 4 courses in natural sciences, and one of them was mineralogy. So it is possible that he had some training in mineralogy. But the thing of it was, he had a degree in business administration. So I don't know what courses, today you go to school, you have elective courses, you have courses that you have to take to do certain things. I don't know if he had to take mineralogy at that time to be a business administration degree or not. But today, they offer about 20 different natural science courses. And instead of calling it mineralogy, today it's called geology course. Well, anyway, in 1848, he had signed an application in Natchez, Mississippi to be naturalized. And later that same year, well, I think it was January 1849, Sutter's Mill was found out in California. And the gold rush the news about the California gold rush began to spread across the nation. So he never finished his naturalization application, because we now find him in California. His mother died in 1852, and another probate took place, and the correspondence showed that he was in California. So we know beyond a shadow of a doubt we've got the right Jacob Waltz. He was in the 1860 census in 1861, he applied for citizenship in Los Angeles. And in 1862, he was in La Paz, Arizona. In 1863, he was in the Bradshaw Mountains in Arizona, south of Prescott. And there in 1864, he was on a special territorial census in Arizona. In 1865, he apparently founded two claims, and one of them was the Big Rebel and the General Grant. And we found some documents on that, but I'm just going to state right now, we've seen half a dozen of his signatures, and the signatures on those claims, I'm just going to come right out and say I don't think that's Jacob Waltz. Anyway, in 1868, he moved to Phoenix.
Well, that really shows us that Jacob Waltz really was a real person. But you know what's really interesting to me is I've always been curious as to when he actually got to Phoenix and what did he do when he got here. When he finally got here, what was he doing in Phoenix?
Well, among the first things he did is he got a homestead for 160 acres. And that was on the north side of the Salt River. So in 1869, the rumors began to float around about this Dr. Thorne mine. And Cordon Cooley up in the Show Low area had met Mr. Thorne while they were in the military during the Civil War. And Thorne had told him all about this mine, and this is a story that you can go back and look that we've already done Dr. Thorne's mine and get the whole story. But Cooley and a couple of his friends went looking for it and run across some Pinell Indians who wouldn't allow them to cross the border, so they gave it up. But Mr. Banta, who was with Mr. Cooley, was a newspaper man, and he sent information to the Prescott Miner, and the guy that was running the newspaper in Prescott was named Mr. Miner. And he put out information about the Thorne mine, and several groups from Wickenburg and Phoenix and Prescott and Tucson all got together and went on this major search for the Dr. Thorne's mine. A fellow named Milton Rose had written a book called The Rainbow's End. And he claimed, not in the book, but he claimed by people that knew him, that he had a relative that was involved in that group, that was out of the Phoenix Brigade, and that he said that Jacob Waltz was in that group. Well, apparently, after this all dissolved, and there was a roster of all the men, and we know the names of at least a dozen of them, but there were about 276 people involved in this search. Ooh. And it wasn't a military thing, so the roster did not survive. Nobody kept it after it was over. So we don't know that he was actually signed up on a roster.
That's a lot of folks.
Yeah. And so anyway, apparently, he continued on searching after this whole thing dissolved and everybody went home.
On his own?
On his own.
Oh.
And of course, one of the things I want to clear up, you know, he allowed Jack Swilling, who was called the father of irrigation in Arizona, opening up all those Hohokam canals. He allowed him to put the canal across the corner, the southeast corner of his 160 acres, and Jacob was actually involved in working with Swilling on that Dutch ditch, they called it. And when the flood came in 1891, we've had several people ask questions, well, if his adobe was swept away, how come they were able to recover the gold? Why wasn't the gold that was in his house swept away? Well, he wasn't anywhere near the Salt River. He was a quarter of a mile north of the Salt River. He wasn't in the floodplain of the river. He wasn't in the river's current. It was the Dutch ditch that overflowed on the corner of his property. And his house was under a foot or two of water, but he wasn't in the current. And you know what water does to adobe? His house just melted. and was unlivable. And it didn't sweep the gold away. All his goods were taken over to Julia Thomas's, where she took care of him. And he developed pneumonia there. And you know, over a period of time taking care of him, he told her some things about the mine and stuff like that, because she knew he had this gold. And he had helped her with some of her debts by paying off some of them and stuff like that. When he was on his deathbed, everybody says that Julia Thomas was the one he told all the information to, but that's not true. We know that Julia Thomas went out looking for a doctor, and she ran across two people that she knew there, Richard Holmes and Gideon Roberts, and asked them to take care of him while she found the doctor. Well, the doctor was tied up delivering a baby, and it was a couple of hours before she got back with the doctor, and he had already passed away. So it was Mr. Holmes that received the information of Jacob Waltz on his deathbed about where the location of the mine was. And it was Mr. Holmes that received the gold that was under his bed, the 48 pounds of very rich gold ore, and that assayed out at a considerable amount of money. And it was sold to a jewelry store, and it had to be assayed so the jewelry store would know what the value was, and that assay took place by a fellow named Joe Porter. And this is another myth that took place. Many people say that Jacob Waltz high-graded that ore from the Vulture mine in Wickenburg. Well, Joe Porter was the assayer for the Vulture mine. That's all this guy did from day to day. He was assay Vulture gold. And
so
when
he'd be the one to know, wouldn't
he would be the one to know. And when he saw the Dutchman's gold, he absolutely said, no way is it similar to the Vulture mine. Julia Roberts was upset about this because she thought the gold should have went to her. She took care of him all that time. And this caused a rift between Roberts and Thomas and her allies, and that was never healed. And the reason we know a little bit about, and we'll get into this a little later, about the truth of this matter of Mr. Roberts, because this brings in a fellow that I've known for over 40 years, Mr. Clay Wurst, who's what we refer to affectionately as a Dutch hunter that spent many years looking for the lost Dutchman mine. And Clay was a partner with Mr. Holmes's son for 20 years. Brownie told Clay, he says, you know, my father never lied to me, and I've never lied to you. And they searched for this mine for 20 years after that. Now, the custody of the gold has been clearly documented by an affidavit that Brownie made, and we're going to post the affidavit here so everybody can read it for themselves.
So after Waltz died is when things really started getting interesting in this whole scheme of things. So what really did happen next? I mean, he's now on his way to the ground. He's dead.
Well, now, this is Julia Thomas sold her bakery ice cream store, and she funded the operation to go into the mountains with the Patrash brothers. She bought a wagon and a team to pull the wagon, all the camping gear, all the food stuff, and they took off into the mountains in July, the hottest part of the year in Arizona. And they were out there for a couple of weeks searching for this mine on the meager information that she had. They ended up bankrupt. The whole town knew that they had went on this search. She just destroyed herself looking for this mine.
It's really fair at this point then to say that Julia Thomas and the Patrash brothers and their father were the first Dutch hunters per se. But you can also say, just as factually, that they were the first losers as well. I mean, if she wound up totally broke What'd she do to make any money?
Well, you're absolutely right, but she made up for that a little bit because then, because of that that little newspaper story we were talking about, that everybody knew that they had been in there and searched and didn't find anything. This fellow named P.C. Bicknell approached her, another newspaper man who was a freelance reporter for several newspapers, and he gave her an interview, which most people thought that he gave her some money for. And this is the beginning of the crooked road that we're going to follow for eternity, I guess. Bicknell wrote a couple of stories in 1894 and 1895 based upon her interview, and some interesting things came out in there that just doesn't hold water. One of the things he mentioned was that Jacob Waltz went to Mexico to avoid military service during the Civil War. Well, why would you go to Mexico to avoid a volunteer military service? Sure. Because the California column that came into Arizona in 1862 to deal with the Confederates was an all-voluntary force out here in the West. And Jacob Waltz didn't need to worry about being involved in that at all. And of course, he wasn't involved.
We didn't have to go anyway.
We know exactly where he was. And this goes back to maybe when he left Germany. One of the suppositions was that he possibly left Germany to avoid military service. And he may have relayed this information to Julia at some point in time, and now it's gotten all mixed up. There were 6 wars going on in Europe at the time Jacob Waltz left. And it could well be that he didn't want to be involved in that. But that's neither here nor there. The point is he went to Mexico to avoid military service. He met Peralta, and Peralta gave him a verbal information on how to find the mine. He picked up a partner in Tucson named Weiser, and they went with this verbal information and found this mine. But in 1953, Sims Ely came out with a book, The Lost Dutchman Mine, in which he made the statement, which obviously was based upon something Bicknell said in those stories, that Jacob Waltz went to Mexico and saved Peralta's life in a bar fight.
What a great guy.
Yeah. And Peralta was so impressed with him and his partner, Weiser, which was now already there instead of being picked up in Tucson, and that they were Confederate veterans, and he made a deal with them and ended up giving them a map to go back up and find the Lost Dutchman mine. Now, listen, who made up what?
Apparently, we're talking about 2 newspaper men. Sims Ely was a newspaper guy. We know that Bicknell was selling his articles to the Chronicle in San Francisco and all over the country, for that matter. So it's apparent to us from what we're seeing here that it really doesn't matter if the stories were true or not, because the legends have come down with all that Who Struck John in it, and we know for a fact that none of it was true.
That's absolutely correct, and we could go on indefinitely about the things that we've found that can't possibly be true. They were mostly made up, and almost every one of them had to do with the media. Even Adolph Ruth in 1931. The media picked that up and spread that all across the country and started a whole another wave of Dutch hunting.
Well, it sells papers.
Absolutely, it sells papers, and that's what we're talking about here. Most of the information that we're learning about the Lost Dutchman mine has been blown completely out of proportion. And of course, Julia then started making maps after this interview with Bicknell, and we can probably show 2 or 3 maps that Julia supposedly was to draw that are virtually reversed from each other. All the maps have been doctored, and to the point that you don't know up from down.
We know that even with Bicknell, some of his own stories he got things backwards in his own stories, and he disclaimed his own stuff, even in the same article. We know that.
There again, here in modern times, this very day, this stuff is still going on. I mean, you not only have the newspaper people that are distorting things, you got people who write books who either deliberately or by accident or by picking up on this various information which is distorted are carrying on with the same thing.
They're just using what they need.
Just using what they need to make a point. And Bicknell himself went out in the mountains for a month looking for this, it was actually the Adolph Ruth map that Adolph Ruth's son said he was using, the Ruth Gonzalez map, the profile map of the two pillars and the rock house, the two-room rock house in a cave, and the mine being across the wash from the cave. Bicknell went out for a month looking for this. And he found the two-room rock house in a cave. Some people still hang on to that two-room rock house he found as the gospel to where the Lost Dutchman mine is located, way over on the east side. But at the end of his story, he says, but it's an Indian ruin, and besides, there's no mine on the other side of the wash. So he denies himself in his own story that ever took place. And yet people use that to this day as if it was gospel. Not only that, some people go so far as to say, well, the Dutchman and Julia and Reini Petrash, who all spoke fluent German, didn't know the difference between 5 and 15 in German. And of course that 15 miles got it over to the rock house. You know,
which was garbage anyway.
Well, the distortions that go on here are unbelievable. And then of course, you know, there's the one story about the sample of the gold that was made into a matchbox, and a certain piece of ore from a certain mine on the east side, and another piece of ore that was found in the mountains, all exhibit mercury vapor, proving all three pieces come from the same mine. Well, the government run a geological survey on mercury vapor in several places out here in the west, including the Superstition Mountains. And the survey showed that the Superstition Mountains, the mercury vapor emitting from Superstition Mountains, is bigger than all the rest of them put together. So, and that is an indication of deep-seated mineralization.
And that's not just one place.
That's not just one place in the Superstitions. But the Superstitions is an indication, the mercury vapor is an indication of deep-seated mineralization. So who's to say that some outcropping someplace didn't surface that contained gold? And you know, I don't know where it is. You don't know where it is.
No.
Nobody knows where it is, and I don't care where it is.
My bank account would be a whole lot different than what it is now, too, if I knew where that gold was. Well, folks, the main reason that we put this video together was to focus on how important it is. If you're going to come out here, and so many people have commented that that's just what they want to do, to go up in this mountain and either search for gold or just go up and enjoy the mountain, or go up to camp in a long extended camping session, or take a long hike, because some of them are quite long. You need to do your homework. Find out what it is, and please don't go in July or August. More people die in July and August on this mountain than any other month. So we know that lots of people have paid far too large a price just to go in these mountains over the years.
Yeah, when Tom and I were putting the museum together, we had some information about traffic and stuff like that. And Tom had made the statement that from the beginning of keeping records about the Superstition Mountains until about 1980, over 350 people have died from all causes in the Superstitions. And now you've got to add another 30 years to that. So
but it proves to us once and for all that Jacob Waltz isn't the only mystery of the Superstition Mountain. Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.